Hi, and welcome to the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. I'm your host, Tegan Thompson. I'm a book lover, a chocoholic, and an INTJ living in a world filled with extroverts. I made this podcast to share my experiences and struggles as an introverted perfectionist, and to bring the inner workings of an introvert's mind to introverts and extroverts alike. So grab a cup of tea and get comfortable. It's time to unmute. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. So last week we talked about extroverted introverts and what it means to be an extroverted introvert and some of the signs that maybe you or someone you know is an extroverted introvert. And this week we will be talking about something closely related to that, but not the same thing. And that is ambiversion, or people who are ambiverts. So what is an ambivert? So a person who is an ambivert tends to exhibit qualities of both extroverts and introverts. So they might kind of be more social and enjoy social interaction and stuff, but at the same time like their own quiet and time alone, and can be reserved sometimes. So they're kind of exhibiting both of those different traits. Ambiverts are often capable of switching between the two based on kind of their surroundings, and that can include things like their mood, the situation they're in, any goals they've set for themselves, or the people that they're around, right? So maybe like they're around people who are more quieter and kind of just have like those quieter personalities, maybe introverted, I don't know. And maybe they feel more comfortable to be extroverted around them. And so maybe they're more extroverted around those quieter people, and vice versa. Maybe they're around extroverted people and they feel more comfortable being more of an introverted type of person, right? So it can depend on all of these different things, all of the things surrounding them kind of factor into like what qualities they are going to portray more in that situation. Ambiversion usually fits people who don't feel like they belong to either the extrovert category or the introverted category. They kind of feel in between, or like they're too much of both, so they're not one or the other, right? They might feel like they're both, or they're just kind of right in the middle. So that's what an ambivert is. Some signs that you or someone you may know may be an ambivert is that you work well individually and also in a group, and you may not really have a preference for either one. So you might not really care like to do things individually or do things in a group, because you feel like you're going to do those things to the best of your ability and get them done no matter what. And so you have no preference on how it's being approached. And that's just kind of an example of shifting between the type of situation, right? So if it was an individual project, they would be able to complete that and be okay with it because they're able to exhibit those introverted qualities. Whereas if it was a group project type of thing, they would still be able to complete that because they're able to exhibit more of those extroverted qualities that require the ease of socialization and not being exhausted from being around people. Another sign that you may be an ambivert is that social situations aren't necessarily something you dread, and they may actually be something you enjoy, but you still get exhausted in social situations after a certain period of time. That period of time is different for everyone. Same goes for introverts as well. But, you know, this kind of just goes to show that you have that extrovert side where like you want to be in those social situations and have social interaction and engage with people that way, but still at the same time you kind of get socially exhausted and feel like, okay, I need some time for myself maybe. I need to back away. Could also enjoy being the center of attention, but only for a short while, because again, you might get like exhausted of it and not get the same pleasure from it that a true extrovert would get from it. Another sign that you may be an ambivert is that you may have some people who think you're outgoing and more extroverted, while there may be other people who think you're more reserved and introverted. And so this kind of goes to show that ambiverts are capable of switching the qualities they portray based on the people they are around. And also it demonstrates that ambiverts don't necessarily identify with either, because they can be both, or they might just be kind of that right in the middle type of thing. There might be people who are kind of like, I don't know, sometimes you're this and sometimes you're that, and I don't know, it doesn't quite fit into either of them. But yeah, so ambiverts don't necessarily identify with an introvert or identify with an extrovert. They kind of feel like they don't belong to either category alone, and that they might belong to both or to neither. I don't know. But it might be harder for them to identify with the category of being an introvert or the category of being an extrovert. And then the last sign I have that you might be an ambivert is that too much downtime or too much alone time makes you feel bored. And you know, that introverted side of you is like, oh, I enjoy my alone time. I enjoy being able to replenish my energy and just relax and refresh and everything. But then the extroverted side of you is like, I want socialization. I want to interact and engage with people. I want to have conversations and blah, 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 right? And so they kind of compete, and you have to find that balance of socializing and having your alone time, so that you feel like you're not bored or overwhelmed, right? You don't want too much alone time where you feel bored, and you don't want too much socialization where you feel overwhelmed. And so finding that balance, and goes for anyone, to be honest, but finding that balance is going to be different for everyone, is really, really important, so that you can keep your mental health in check and keep your energy in check. So I want to kind of briefly talk about the differences between ambiverts and extroverted introverts, because I talked about extroverted introverts last week and I talked about ambiverts this week, and I know kind of surface level they might seem very similar and probably the same to a lot of people, but there are actually some differences between the two. So I'm going to briefly talk on that. So as I mentioned last week, extroverted introverts, they still tend to lie towards the introverted side of the spectrum, right? So if you had a spectrum where one side is 100% extroverted and the other side is 100% introverted, and right in the middle is like that 50-50, 50% extroverted, 50% introverted, right? If you have that spectrum, extroverted introverts are still going to lie towards the introverted side, and not to put like limits on it or anything, but they probably would lie somewhere in between like the 60 and 70% range of being an introvert. I don't know. Again, not to put caps on it, because you never know, and people are different, and however you want to identify is fine. But to just give you an idea of what I mean. So you're not in the middle necessarily. You're still on that introverted side of the spectrum, but you still might exhibit some extroverted qualities, and your introverted qualities might not be as extreme as someone who's more in like the 80s or 90s percent of being an introvert, right? While ambiverts are gonna lie more right in that middle of that spectrum, so maybe between that 40 and 60%. They kind of aren't leaning too much to one side or the other. They're kind of right in that middle, and they exhibit both qualities. So that's kind of the really big and main difference I want you to take away from it. But there's a couple other things I want to mention. So extroverted introverts tend to identify as introverts. If you would ask them, are you introverted or extroverted, they would probably tell you they think that they are introverted. But their introverted qualities, like I said, are going to be to a lesser degree, not as extreme as an introvert who lies further on the introverted side of that spectrum. While ambiverts are not going to identify as either, right? Because they exhibit both those introverted and extroverted qualities. And so if you'd ask them, are you introverted or extroverted, they would probably say, I'm neither. I don't think I fit into either of those categories. So that's another difference between them, is that, like those extroverted introverts are essentially, they're still introverts. It's just that sometimes they can be more extroverted and give off the perception that they are extroverted, but they still believe that they are an introvert at heart. And ambiverts, they're kind of going to be like, I don't know. I'm kind of like both, I guess. Neither. I don't know. So that's a really important difference also. And then another difference is that ambiverts adjust to their surroundings and their circumstances and kind of the things that they put forth in their life. So, like I mentioned, if they set a goal for themselves, they might decide that they're going to be more extroverted in certain situations so that they can obtain those goals. And maybe they are kind of in a really joyful and happy mood, and so maybe they're going to be more extroverted because they feel really good. Whereas maybe if they're sad, they might be more introverted, more reserved, kind of wanting to be to themselves rather than kind of engaging with all these people. Extroverted introverts don't really change or adjust the qualities they exhibit. They might change depending on the people they're around, but they're not going to change beyond that. So only people are going to affect how an extroverted introvert exhibits their extroverted and introverted qualities, whereas anything in a ambivert surroundings can affect which qualities they exhibit. So those are just some differences between ambiverts and extroverted introverts. If you feel like you lie in either of those categories, I would encourage you to kind of maybe do some more research and try and understand more about yourself. I think it's so impactful and important to understand how you work and what makes you feel good so that you can live to the best quality of life that you can. And then I just want to remind you that there is so much diversity. I feel like talking about Ambiversion just adds this another layer of diversity that is so amazing. because you can essentially apply the concept of ambiversion to anything, really, when it comes to personalities, right? So you have your extroverts and you have your introverts, but kind of right in the middle are your ambiverts. So there's always going to be like those middle things when you have a spectrum. And, it's kind of interesting that you don't have people that exhibit one or the other. You have people who exhibit qualities from both sides, and they kind of can relate to both and can be that point of view for both sides. And it's just really interesting and adds that little layer of diversity, and I think that's wonderful. And then also, like I said, do research, understand yourself so that you can better self-identify. I don't like when people try to label me. I try not to label other people. I know I do it sometimes, and I'm working on that, but I think it's so important to be able to, if you want to label yourself and not let other people label you, because you know you best, and you should be able to identify how you want to, and that is really important. And being able to do that requires kind of learning about yourself and learning about the possibilities out there. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you learned anything new, please go share it with a friend. And as always, have a good weekend, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next week on the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast.